Hi, everyone, and welcome into the Comics Lair. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Convention, and heroes aren't hard to find. Today's panel is about found family in comics and comics-related media. And we'll start by asking the panel to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves and their interest in comics. Bobby, you want to start?
Hi, yeah, I'm Bobby Nash. I have been a longtime reader of comics since about the mid 70s, I guess. Yeah, mid to late 70s. I still remember the first comic I ever bought. It was a 3-pack of Amazing Spider-Man with 3 issues, 192, 193, and 194 in them. So I've been hooked ever since. I also write comics, which is very cool also. I love doing that. I also write novels and stuff, like you can see some of my book covers behind me, and just thrilled to be here to talk comics.
Kyoko?
Everyone, my name is Kyoko M. I am the author of the Cinder and Bone science fiction series and the Black Parade urban fantasy series. As far as comics, I started, I think, when I was very small. Most of it was what my dad had. My dad is a big dork, just like I am. And so he had a nice little collection of comics. It was a mix of DC and some X-Men, a little bit of Silver Surfer. So I got to grow up reading those sort of things, like the death of Superman as well. So that's kind of where my background comes
Okay, Dahlia?
I'm Dahlia Rose. I'm USA Today bestselling author. I write multi-genres from cozy mysteries to romantic suspense. I'm originally through Europe, so comics have been a big deal for me, except that the ones you had like Asterix and Obelix and, Tintin, Groot, comics like that. And when I got to America, I really got into like the Marvel and DC, comics. Batman is one of my favorites, and we've got our little collection going in my office. I like to see new actual authors at conventions with their new comics and how they delve into their world, and it's really great.
Scott?
My name is Scott Larson. I am a comic book artist who has been self-publishing my own book called Visitations. Visitations is the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. I've been reading comic books as long as I can remember. And the first issue I ever got was a Batman issue when I was 4 years old, and it was number 274. I don't have that original comic, but I do have one that I bought probably about 20 years ago, a copy of that. And I am a very big Spider-Man fan. I, at one point, owned every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, and I'm well on my way to re-owning every issue of Amazing Spider-Man.
Kristen?
Hi, my name is Kristen Geaman. I don't write any comics sort of things. In my real job, I'm a historian, so I have to write about the real world. I first got into comics when I was a kid through my dad's comics. He was a big Batman fan. And then I didn't read it for a while, and I got back in when I was in grad school, and I needed something that was not as serious and was happier and more fun. So that was when I got back into comics, and then I've been like trying to make up for lost time ever since.
Jim?
So I'm Jim Nettles. I write science fiction, urban fantasy, bit of horror, bit of this, that, and the other. I'm also a nonfiction author, write about a whole bunch of different stuff. And I got into comics again, kind of because my dad, we actually had them in the store. We sold them. Dad was a big comics fan, primarily DC. But I kind of grew up with a lot of those, and that's where I came from.
And as some of you know, I write historical fantasy, paranormal romance, science fiction, and romantic suspense. I got into comic books when I was 8 years old. And if we're talking about our first comics, my first one was Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. It was an Elastic Lad Phantom Zone story that had Mon-El in it. I do actually still have it, but it doesn't have its cover. So I'm keeping it not because it's a collectible, but because I love it. And I talked my grandfather into buying it for me. And I remember he said, "Honey, are you sure your mama's going to want you to have that?" And I said, "Oh, she won't mind if you buy it for me." And I think had he known what he was starting, he might have made a different decision. But I got the comic, and that was the start of all of it. So since tonight's panel is about found family, let's talk about what the phrase found family means to you. Kyoko, do you want to start?
Sure, absolutely. I've always been a fan of found family since the early days before I really even knew what it was, back when we would get it in things like Disney films or other animated films that I was allowed to watch when I was a kid. To me, it typically ends up being the people that choose to stick around that are not always directly related to a protagonist or an antagonist in certain stories. The people that they choose to have in their lives who have meaningful relationships.
Okay. Dahlia?
For me, I think that found family is, you know, trying to figure out who you fit in with, because we all say, we've got our family and that's blood, and then we have our family that's not blood, and that's our, but to people like me that has a mixed family and mixed generational context, and being the mom of 5 kids and then 2 step kids and a multitude of children that my kids used to bring home from me to mother because they needed it. I think found family is just, someone that you can trust and someone you can believe in and put your, faith in, even though that sometimes they may just here and there. At the end of the day, you still have that togetherness.
Okay, Scott?
To me, a found family is a family you create for yourself. We're all born into families, and we all have, some of us have brothers and sisters and whatnot. But the found family are the people who you choose to have around you and who you choose to become close to outside of your own family.
Okay, Kristen?
And I feel like so much good stuff has already been said. But yes, I would see found family as people you may or may not be related to biologically, because I don't want to say that you can't have someone that you're biologically related to in your found family, but it's often your friends. It's the people you choose to have, and your connection is deep, and you can really trust each other. And I would say it almost goes beyond what we conventionally define as friends.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's kind of adding on to everything everybody said. But to me, the big differentiator, when you go among circles, because there's the people maybe the people you work with. So we start talking about the difference between superhero teams or something like that, and truly family. It's those people who cross a certain line, and there exists that real bond that's there that sometimes can be tighter than blood. It's the people that you spend a lot of time with. It's the people that you absolutely trust. And sometimes that you want to kill, but you've made the choice to stick with. And it's that really deep bond that forms a lot of the time over time, but it comes about a lot of the time because either fates throw you together or whatever the case may be. But it's the people you're stuck with and you can't get rid of no matter what you do.
Okay, Bobby?
Yeah, there's been a lot of really good stuff here said, so I won't repeat that. But like in terms of comics, when I think of or in any kind of media with found family, when you have the difference between the teams and the families, the teams are always in costume, they're always working, and then they go their separate ways. The ones I think of with found family are the ones that they're always there without their costumes on. They're still together. They go trips together. They do things outside that are not part of their job together. And it seems like they always just enjoy being around one another. So I have some examples. That's kind of what I was thinking when I was putting together my list of the found family comics. So yeah, that togetherness, that and like Jim said, nobody gets on your nerves quite like family, even if they're found family.
Yeah. Well, I can't add anything to what you all have said, but Bobby brought up the point that I wanted to move into next, which is what makes the difference between a superhero team and a superhero team that's also a family? Where's the line that we cross, and how do you define it? Dahlia, you want to start?
Ooh, yeah, you just putting me on the spot. I think along the context of that line, as an example, maybe Teen Titans and that kind of family structure that they have. Each of them come from a different place, but together they found that kind of bond where they can be with each other outside of work and then, still go and save the world. I've been watching the new Teen Titans on HBO. It's very much darker than I'm expected from when the kids were watching it as cartoons and sang it in Japanese. But I think that along that line, that's one of the perfect found families that I could think of. We've got, Deathstroke, we've got, all the others that are there watching each other's back, and then they go home kind of to like same place. And they made this family, not it was out of necessity, but it became something more. It became something that they created and they needed and they wanted to continue no matter what turbulence, went on in comic book structure or in the show. They try to save one another. And I think that's one of the great found family structures is that they try to save each other.
Okay, Scott?
When I think of found family, it's kind of interesting because the first thing that pops into my mind is the Fantastic Four. And it's an interesting dynamic. I made the comment earlier about how you're not related, but obviously there are all kinds of different relations there. From Reed and being married to Sue, and to Sue being Johnny's sister. But then there's the Thing, Ben or She-Hulk or whoever who are just close family friends. And so it's kind of like, it's part family, but it's also part friendship. So when I think of something like that, that's the team that pops right into my head.
Okay, Kristen?
Yeah, I kind of building a bit off what Dahlia said when you posed that question. What's the difference thinking about between a found family and a superhero team? Immediately, it made me think of Teen Titans / New Teen Titans in the comics versus the Justice League. And so I felt, yes, that the various iterations of the Teen Titans, some more than others, but they tend to hang out more with each other outside of saving the world and also when they're not in costume. And they generally seem to like each other and do not work related, if you will, activities with each other, whereas the Justice League feels overall more like coworkers. I know some of the Justice League people are very close, but at least from what I've read, which is admittedly not everything, with the Justice League, they are more of a group of close coworkers than a family. So I feel like in when you're dealing with alter ego is wanting to hang out with people in both versions of themselves.
Okay, Jim?
So I'm gonna go a little off here because I'm going to say that there's one film as of late that really kind of shows the difference between them. That's Deadpool 2. So when you look, you have he and Vanessa are building the relationship. Spoilers, she dies. So he becomes a little unhinged. And, then it becomes a matter of who does he go to? I mean, because there's the long-standing love-hate relationship between X-Men, Deadpool, X-Men, parts of the X-Men trying to bring him in, make him part of the family because they want to rescue the orphans. But instead he goes off to go create his own X-Force, which they immediately died. But it was I went and assembled a team of my own to go play with my own toys. Let's all go charging into battle. And oops, that's kind of creating your team. That's not necessarily taking good care of them, but that's neither here nor there. But at the end of the day, there's still those relationships. I mean, you look at the different people that are closest to him in that current iteration of the film. You see people that care about somebody who no one should actually care about, but they recognize who's underneath. And there's definitively very dysfunctional relationships, but you get to see in that one film the family that's chosen, the family that you regret you chose, and the team that really regrets having been chosen. But I thought that just kind of plays with it in a very twisted way.
Okay, Bobby?
The top two on my list have already been mentioned here, which were Teen Titans and the Fantastic Four. because the Teen Titans were the ones I was talking about. You would often see them go have barbecues together, or they go camping together, or they're playing baseball together, or stuff like that. Excuse me. With the Fantastic Four, like Scott was saying, you got all these the others like the Thing and She-Hulk, but it's Uncle Ben and Aunt Jen. There's that family. I mean, they act like a family. The way Ben and Johnny fight, that's siblings fighting. So, but since those have been mentioned, I have the third on my list is one that when you first say it, it doesn't sound like a big family guy because he's considered such a loner. But Batman to be such a loner has adopted all of these kids into, now granted, he adopts them, puts them in costumes and says, go toward the gunfire. but he has taken in all of these kids and teenagers and given them a safe place to train, to learn, to work. And so for this guy who is such a loner, he really has gone out of his way to create the family he himself did not have as a child growing up, after his parents were murdered. So I would definitely call that a good found family. And it's a very dysfunctional found family because they quite often don't understand him because they know him as this guy that took us in and takes care of us. But then they go to work with him and he's a completely different kind of guy. He's not always the easiest guy to live with or to understand. But there's definitely a big family element there. And I think Alfred being like the grandfather almost of that family, because Alfred is probably the closest thing that Bruce has to a parent.
Okay. Kyoko?
So my example was going to be the Bat family because I mean, right? Yeah, because I think there's a joke. People have made many jokes about like Bruce being like, "I'm a loner," and then he takes one step and orphans spill all out of his cape. There's like 15 of them. It always cracks me up. He's just like, "No, I'm alone." No, you literally have all the kids. You are the biggest dad ever, Batman. But anyway, I think the difference between the two for me is an example between the MCU and something like the original Suicide Squad movie, which was to date the worst use of family that I've ever heard in a film. It was unearned and it made no sense. Whereas what I liked about the way the MCU did it is they didn't rush it either. Nobody says that word until Endgame. So you've had this 10, 11-year history between these characters having meaningful friendships and relationships. Almost all of them have interacted and had important scenes and important growth moments between them. And again, especially in Age of Ultron, I love that scene with Mjolnir. That is one of my favorite found family moments because it's them just, hanging out the way we've always imagined that they do. It's usually off screen, but they finally gave you that little peek into it. And I think that was what the difference was, is that, again, each of them has a dynamic between each other and then as a team. But it's not so standoffish. It's not so much that they're just coworkers. It seems that each time they came together, they really did have meaningful relationships and friendships, and of course differences and things that became difficult as the film continued and as the series continued. But I think that's probably the biggest difference between the two.
Well, I'm surprised and appalled that none of you have mentioned the one that I'm going to suggest, which is the Legion of Superheroes.
I was not going to take that from you, Nancy.
Tim, I appreciate your thoughtfulness. I fell in love with the Legion when I was 8 or 9 years old, and they fit a lot of the criteria that several of you have mentioned. Is they live together first in an upside down rocket ship, and then in this giant complex in 30th century, now 31st century metropolis. Every once in a while, we get scenes of them going out to do stuff, although the writers have to be careful because there's so many of them. The number was capped at 24 at one point. And they're all there's so many of them, if they're not in costume and they don't have their logos on their chests and they're calling each other by their first names, usually there's a little narration box, whatever they call those, up in the corner, so that you know that these are actually the Legionnaires and they're out having a fun time. And it took, like Kyoko was saying, a long time for them to develop personal relationships, because in the early days of the group, they just didn't have them. But then as we got into the 80s and the 90s, it was more of an effort to build the personal ties in there. So the one that the most people mentioned was the Teen Titans. So let's talk about the Teen Titans first. Scott, what are some of the things about the Teen Titans that you see as bonding them as a family?
I think the fact that they're all pretty much the same age is, that's the thing that brought them together in the first place. The thing with the Teen Titans is there's been so many different iterations of them. There was the team that was in the 60s, and then there was, the new Teen Titans, and then it grew into something else. But really the thing that bonds them, in my opinion, is their age. And they're all kind of going through the same thing at the same time.
Okay. Kristen?
When I first think of the Teen Titans, I think more of the new Teen Titans, so the slightly bigger roster. And aside from the age thing, I think also they all needed it. They all needed a family at the moment when they come together. In particular, I'm thinking, Starfire was chased from her homeland by a slaver, so she really needs a family. Raven was looking for people who could help her with her other more hardcore family. Donna, her family is she has 8,000 different origins, so it's always kind of weird with her. So sticking with the Teen Titans, that at least makes sense for her family. Of course, initially, Robin was kind of having a spat with Batman, was trying to be more independent. Cyborg was having trouble with his family. The Doom Patrol had ended. It seems like maybe Kid Flash, Wally kind of had a family to go back to, but everybody else, they really needed somebody, and they were all close to the same age, or pretty much the same age, going through a lot of similar things, and they wanted to bond, and they could really help each other out emotionally, dealing with what they were going through. And so I think being at that age, kind of late teens, and going through some stuff and getting together with people who are also going through stuff, that's kind of like in college. Your friendships in college can be really impactful, particularly if you're all living in the dorms and stuff together. And then New Teen Titans is kind of like that. And so that's going to stick with you. It's going to stick with you forever.
Jim?
Yeah, I'd kind of want to build on that, because with Teen Titans, and I've seen a couple of the different iterations over the years, but it's, I think the combination of, you've packed a bunch of kids who are all going through puberty, and they're going through need. They need a family. They need that belonging, but they also form some of that teenage sort of pack that you can create bonds that feel extraordinarily strong at that age. And then you combine with that superpowers, and you combine with that everything else, where they really don't have anybody else that they can relate to other than this pack. But at the same time, they still have their internal conflicts. They still have the people that they're closer to within the group, and the different dynamics that move around. And I think that's one of the things to watch. And as you have different people cycle through in the different iterations, you get to see different relationships and different kind of responses as to how they react to each other.
Okay. Bobby?
Yeah, I agree. I think, and the Teen Titans that I grew up with was the new Teen Titans in the 80s, the Wolfman and Perez run. And I think, it's already been stated here that putting them together as teenagers and dealing with a lot of real world stuff, they dealt with some pretty heady storylines back in that book. But we also, as the audience, I was a teenager at the time I was reading these. They grew up. They didn't keep them static as teenagers. They actually grew up and, had lives. Their lives took other turns. Some of them got married. Some of them stopped being kid heroes and became adult heroes, changed their names, different things like that. And so we got to grow with them and see, how they grew as a group and how they, separated. Kristen mentioned the dorms. I thought that was a great, description of Titan's Tower. We're a team. We're all going to live here in this one building. The fact that how it didn't fall over is beyond me, but it's, I'm not an engineer, but the fact that they were all together and they spent their time together, they would do things together. It was not uncommon to see 2 or 3 of them in street clothes doing something together when the action started and they had to go take care of a problem. So yeah, it was just that they all seemed to just enjoy being together.
Kyoko?
So what I thought was interesting with the Teen Titans, and of course my experience is strictly the original animated series. We didn't have a lot of comic book shops growing up, so I didn't get to read the comics. So my exposure to it was the original run of the animated series. And I always thought it was interesting because all of them are going through a coming of age, sort of the way that YA novels are typically based around. And so it really worked for the teen dynamic for all of them to be at the same stage of kind of, okay, well, I'm now of age that I can do some things that adults do, but also I'm still learning about myself, where I fit in the world. And all of that really gelled well with each other because they all understood what the other person was going through, of wanting that independence and wanting to be out from under that very heavy oversight, like someone like Dick Grayson definitely had. And so I think that's what made them bond so well, is that all of them were at a start of a new journey. So they were completely out of childhood and moving on to the next stage in their life. And that seeking other people out is a lot of what you do when you reach that age. And even though they all have these fantastic powers and amazing backstories and very vibrant personalities, they all kind of were in that same place where they knew that in order to grow, they needed to be with other people who were like them and were different from them, so they could kind of learn how to roll with the punches and the different things that they're going to encounter and more when they get even older than that.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine seeing Superman and Batman sitting on the couch playing video games.
Never.
Like Cyborg and Gar. Yeah.
Dahlia?
And you're on mute.
You're muted.
And now I'm on mute. I didn't want you to hear the doggies barking. So for me, about them in correlation of the Breakfast Club, that whole like set of people that don't fit, and then all of a sudden they come together and they learn about each other and they fit. They all have some kind of angst going on, and you just see it happening, but then you're seeing them learn to connect with each other, even sometimes, even if there's still that core of connection there that began from a friendship and then turned into something family. So I think that was really part of the whole foundation of how I think about the Titans and how they work.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite episodes of the Teen Titans current show is season 1, episode 8, Donna Troy, because I thought they so perfectly showcased the friendship between Donna and Dick. For Nightwing fans, Dick would be Dick Grayson, Nightwing, because they showed them as kids when Wonder Woman would come to conduct some kind of JLA business with Batman, and they would hang out together. And the actors did a good job of really selling that. And there's a couple of panels in the Outsiders comic book, which was a team that featured Roy Harper, who was then being called Arsenal instead of Speedy, and Nightwing. And Arsenal takes Nightwing to task because he says, you're holding yourself too aloof. In the Titans, we built a family. And yeah, Donna died and that didn't work out so well for us, but this is a team and the team still needs you, even if it doesn't need you the way the family needs you. And that's kind of always stuck with me, that and the fact that it was Nightwing that Roy went to find his daughter. And I realize that has been retconned, but that's okay. Those of us who are old fart fans will just cling to the version that we like and ignore the retcon. And those who love the retcon are welcome to it. But, and that's you to come to somebody and say, I just found out I've got a kid with a supervillain. I don't know where she is and I need to find her. Will you help me? You've got to trust somebody an awful lot to take that step, to bear your personal business that way. And just, I think it was Dahlia who mentioned Donna Troy's somewhat confusing origin. I went to the Titans panel at Dragon Con, and Curran Walters and Connor Leslie were talking about preparation for their roles. And Connor Leslie said she went out, she bought all these comic books, and then she thought, how many versions of Donna are there and which one are we doing in the show? So they ultimately went with the version where Wonder Woman had saved her. But you could do a whole panel on Donna Troy's origin and how we would fix it. Does anybody want to add anything about the Teen Titans? Yes.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I thought of after I stopped talking and I realized that nobody brought up is these were all former sidekicks. You know, they all
Yes, they were,
started
yeah.
on the same age and they all had a mentor. And I think that with the new Teen Titans, someone mentioned Wally having a stable family, which he did not. If you read the Flash comic that he starred in later on, it showed how unstable his family was. But they're all trying to live up to something, and that's something that bonded them, I think, as well, because that's a hard thing when you're a kid. If whether it's a parent or a mentor, you know, it's like Robin slash Nightwing had Batman, Kid Flash had the Flash, Speedy had Green Arrow, and so they had to be better than they actually were. So that would bond them more so. And you know, you mentioned the Donna Troy episode of the Titans TV show, and that they were hanging out together. They both, Donna and Dick, were dealing with the same issues, and so that was something else that bonded them, was that they're all going through the same thing in a way that had nothing to do with their age.
Yeah, they almost had to. There was a bit of having to prove themselves because, you know, they were sidekicks, and so their partners were always treating them that way, even when they were no longer kids. There's a great crossover in the early New Teen Titans book where the Justice League shows up and just starts bossing the kids around, and they all decide, okay, not having it, and they stand up to them, and it causes a big rift between the Justice League and the Teen Titans. And I thought that was great, where the kids, you know, because it's a very primal thing in all of our lives. There's a point where you stop being just a kid and you become an adult person. And I thought they handled it very well.
Yeah. And I think that's come up a couple of times, because I remember one with a different version of the Teen Titans where the characters who were the new Teen Titans had kind of grown up and moved on, and they were just the Titans, and there was a younger group, and the Justice League came in to boss the younger group around, and it's actually Nightwing who steps up and goes, hold it, just hold it. You know, you wanted them to talk to you, give them some space. And he really faces them down with help from his Titans colleagues. And he actually says to Batman, I'll give Tim a ride back to Gotham. I think he can skip the lecture tonight. And that's the way it goes. I mean, and that really, incidents like that, like Bobby mentioned, are the line that marks, you're not a kid who has to do what you're told anymore. You're an adult who makes the decisions on your own.
And they kind of play that up too in the Young Justice series, which is pretty much a Titan series, where the adults are doing things and they just kind of like shoo the teenagers away, even though the teenagers seem to be the ones getting stuff done. And so it's nice to see when those kind of things come to a head.
Anybody want to say anything else about the Titans before we move on?
Well, and I think that Scott's point and Bobby's are really important here, is that these are, you know, a bunch of kids that are put under risk every day. These are, you know, and in essence, they also have a trauma bond, you know, where their parental figures have kind of thrown them all together here to learn together and go a little bit feral. Which is one of the fun things to watch, is that moment. There's a fun clip of Teen Titans are running away. Batman's behind them, all the stuff that they're doing to, you know, slow Batman down. And, you know, he's down to Batman is on the roller skates, still coming. It's that idea of these are kids that have had to take on a lot of responsibility very early at the hands of people that otherwise are out to save the rest of the world. But these kids, they're really toughening up and hardening. So the fact that they also have that ability to break through that level of difficulty and create those relationships, I think is one of the other big pieces, that they are all sidekicks, but now they're coming into their own, which means they're also competing with each other as much as bonding.
Okay.
Well, and I was just going to say how Nancy, you brought up the outsiders and that quote, and we don't need to discuss it, but it just kind of got me thinking. And I feel like that's maybe one of the reasons that I never enjoyed the Outsiders book quite as much as some of the Titans books was because the Outsiders didn't feel as much like a found family as the Titans. It had a little bit more of that coworker vibe. I think maybe because of the missions they were on. I don't know, maybe it was trying to be a more serious book. I don't know, but
I also think that delineated the difference in characters between Batman and Nightwing, or Batman and Robin, because Robin created a team of friends. Batman created a team of people that work for Batman.
oh yes, sorry. We're getting confused, right? Because there's so many different outsiders as well. And then Nancy was referencing another outsiders after Donna died. Oh no, it's definitely true for Batman's outsiders. That is hardcore coworkers. Those are friends from work. If they're even friends.
I was gonna say you're gonna go as far as they're friendly.
From work, yeah, from work. But that other outsiders that did have that had Roy and Dick on it, it just felt not as family-ish as the Titans.
Well, since we've been talking about the Titans and their connection to Batman and the Justice League, let's move to the Bat family. Kristen, what about the Bat family, aside from children falling out of Batman's cape everywhere it goes, what about the Bat family makes it a found family for you?
So I think I like to kind of think that Bruce Wayne Batman has kind of built two families. He kind of has his Bruce Wayne family and he has his Bat family, because sometimes, and it depends on the writer, some people seem to be not as popping up as much in their outside of their suits. But aside from all the adoptions and stuff, it's the trust, which is very, very difficult for Batman to place in people. It's the trust that he has and the reliance that he places on these other people. I think that in his willingness to let them help him, that's a big step for him. But taking Batman out of the equation, because all the other people are family too. They're not just family in relation to Batman. I think you get some really good sibling vibes with the Robins and the Batgirls.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, I'd build on that, because again, you look at the Robins and the Batgirls, which they all wind up in some way mentoring each other, going and saying, yeah, this is how you survive underneath the bat. You can learn a lot as long as you live that long. But then you look at other incarnations of Batman where it's also where you kind of put some of the Robins aside, and you look at the relationships then between, say, Catwoman, the various iterations there, and Stalkerish. There's still times where there is a degree of desire for family there on both their parts. You kind of see that relationship there amongst a couple of times with Batman and some of the antagonist side of things, as to which side do they really fall on. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to ignore Bat Daddy coming through with the Bat credit card, and adopting as many orphans as he possibly can. I kept waiting for the day that you were just going to see, like and I just went blank, but an entire army of Robins, all dressed in, not quite alike, but coming along behind the Bat to come and say, with all their daddy issues. But it's kind of hard to ignore the fact of him as a paternal figure, and still having Alfred to be the one that comes in and checks that.
Well, Alfred died.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And that we could do a whole thing on that too. Bobby, what do you think about the Bat family?
I think it's interesting. Like I said, it's a big dynamic, because we do have this guy that is painted as a loner so much, which is weird because he's a loner, but he's a member of the Justice League. He's a member of the Outsiders at one time. He's in all these different places. He teams up with Superman regularly. And so because he's so popular, he's everywhere. I do love the fact that I think the kids humanize Bruce a little bit. because it wouldn't take much for Bruce to become a villain. He is so deep into his mission that it wouldn't take much for him to like step over that line. I think having all of these kids help with that, you know, and keep him kind of grounded, and Alfred as well, you know, because Alfred doesn't take any crap, you know, off of Bruce. And I think that helps with the kids. And then you got the different layers of kids too, because even though, you know, Batman is like the top of the pyramid, really it's Nightwing and Tim Drake, Robin, and Barbara, Batgirl, who kind of also watch over the younger ones that are coming up. So there's kind of like this older sibling, younger sibling, and they're all just kind of, you know, looking out for each other. And because some of my favorite scenes have been where it's not the superhero stuff, but seeing the family, like we've got to go to some gala black tie thing, and Bruce is, you know, they're helping the kids, you know, like Damien tie his tie because he's never had to tie one. Things like that. And I like that. I think that makes because it's easy for Batman to feel like just a fighting machine. And I think those type of scenes kind of humanize him in a way that I enjoy.
Kyoko?
So I've always been a very, very hardcore Bat Family person, just because I grew up on Batman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, and Justice League Unlimited. And I think that when I think about the Bat Family, I think the stuff that works is that he always sees a piece of himself in each of them. And they can kind of see in reverse that he's a very difficult taskmaster and a very big authority figure. But at the end of the day, it's still very apparent to them about how much he cares. There's an episode called Robin's Reckoning where he finds out that Tony Zuko's still alive. And so, of course, obviously, Robin goes on like, I'm going to go kill him spree, which, I mean, after what he did, you don't blame him. And then he finally gets to the moment where he has the opportunity to do it and chooses not to. And, you know, he's been avoiding Bruce this entire time. And Bruce explains to him, I wasn't following you to stop you. I just wanted to make sure he was not going to take you away from me. And that was such a powerful moment of just, because Robin didn't understand. He thought that, oh, well, you know, you and your rigid rules, I'm not supposed to kill, that kind of thing. And in reality, it was about him being afraid of Tony killing Robin like he did his family. And I think that's really what draws me to the Bat Family at the end of the day, is that, again, he always has his strict rules and the difficult things that they have to deal with when they're dealing with him. But it's always apparent how much he cares and how much he invests in each one of them. And they're not tools to you know, for his crusade. He always, you know, makes sure that they know how much they matter to him. And I think that's really what I was like. And even in moving forward, it gets kind of bitter, but Batman Beyond is similar of how Terry was able to kind of get through to his old crotchety man mentality, and he warms up to him a lot. They really become this great, wonderful dynamic later on in that show. So.
Dahlia?
For Batman, I think that he was thrust into fatherhood, something that he didn't want, but something that he actually more than likely needed. Losing his parents so early and so young in life, and then he only had to look up to Alfred, who takes care of him. When he takes on, you know, his Bat kids, as he called them, since he's Bat Daddy. But when he takes them on, it's like he doesn't want to be a father, but yet he does. He doesn't want to care for them, but yet he does. And it all stems back to, you know, watching his parents being killed and everything, and having that dynamic with his father. And he's still struggling with this whole I'm an island unto myself thing, but he can't resist the kids and can't resist helping them, because he actually had the trauma that they've had, kind of. They've all grown up with some kind of trauma, and he has it the worst because he spent 70 years, fighting the Joker so far. And it's just a matter of how some people are just thrust into, you know, some are thrust into being superheroes. He was thrust into being a father.
Scott?
You know, it's really interesting, the whole Batman family concept. When I was growing up, when I was real little, they had two different books. DC was publishing two different books. One was Batman Family, and the other one was Superman Family. And I was drawn towards Batman Family. At this point, it was Dick Grayson, Robin, and Barbara Gordon Batgirl, and then whoever they happened to throw in. There was like Alfred stories in there and a bunch of reprints and things like that. But from the beginning, that group has been more of a real family than something like a Superman family where it's a bunch of aliens. And I think a lot of it is because, and especially going back to the early days, the characters chose to be there. You know, Barbara Gordon chose to become Batgirl. You know, it wasn't thrust upon her; she chose it. And to a certain degree, you know, Dick Grayson could have walked away from it any time as well. And I'm talking about the early days. I'm not necessarily talking about what came after 1986. But from the beginning, that it was that aspect that always attracted me to them, is because they chose it, even though, you know, now it's like, well, he chose them and he was manipulating them and all this business. I think that at the core, that's not necessarily true, because Dick Grayson still goes back, you know, and he can't help it because he loves Bruce. When Jason Todd died originally, there was that whole, you know, after Death in the Family, there was a 4-issue miniseries, or it was within the Batman series, and I can't remember, it was Batman Year 3. And it was written by Marv Wolfman, and he really dealt with this back and forth between Bruce and Dick. And they touched on that on the Titans TV show a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, they're humans and they have real emotions, and they're able to relate to each other in that way as a family would, whether they were actually DNA or not. You know, Damon's DNA, but the rest of them aren't.
Yeah. Well, and there's somebody posted on Twitter this week. It's a page from a Peter Tomasi story where Dick goes to Crime Alley to honor the Waynes in Bruce's place. And there's a lovely little sequence where Dick sees Bruce in his mind kneeling in the alley in the blood of his parents, but he also sees himself kneeling by his parents' bodies in the ring at the circus. And there's one of the stories, it might have been in the Robin Anniversary and Giant, that talked about how Bruce took Dick in on impulse because he looked at this kid and he saw himself. And personally, I don't love the stories where Bruce is just an outright jerk to the kids, because I think he's driven. I think he's eyes on the prize very much, but I can't see him pasting his kids across the face all the time. That just bothers me personally a lot as a fan and a reader. But there's a scene where Cass's dad has been killed and she says she's an orphan now, and Bruce, being Bruce, says, "You'll have a family as long as I'm alive." And just like that, Cass joins the Bat family. And there's a nice sequence where Cass and Duke are fighting somebody, and Duke says something to the guy like, "Well, you know, I'm going to let her take over because she'll finish this faster than I would." And he turns to Cass and he goes, "You got it?" She goes, "I got it." And that's just so, there's so much trust in that and so much affection that I think that's part of the whole family thing too. You might be really, like Bruce and Dick get mad at each other, but underneath it, there's still always that trust. Does anybody else want to say anything about the Bat family before we move on to the Fantastic Four?
There's one other idea I've always wondered about that everybody looks at me when I'm nuts when I say this, but it is almost the idea that the Joker is the younger brother to the Bat trying to find the way to impress him. It's the dysfunctional younger brother. And and Bruce's reaction to it, because if you watch, the reaction between the two of those is always much more magnified than a lot of the Bat's other antagonists, where it's like, all right, we're going to go for the Bat. We're going to go for the Bat. Where with the Joker, it is so typically so very personal, and I know exactly where to hit you. You know exactly where to hit me. And it's that Joker gets off on the fact of he can get under the Bat's skin. And at the same time, the fact that Batman has that ability, and there's a dysfunctional family relationship there as well that I think strikes me much more than a lot of the others.
I don't know if I would label it brother, but that does make sense to me, because that was one of the points that I thought really was excellent in Return of the Joker, the Batman Beyond film, where Terry brings that up to the Joker. He was like, "You've always been trying to make him laugh, and you're pathetic." And he straight breaks the Joker, which I don't think up until that point in the animated series, Batman had ever done that before. Like Joker goes off the deep end when this is pointed out to him of like, you have this obsession of in your mind, you think you're going to somehow make him laugh and you can't do it. And that's why you are obsessed and you won't let it go. And he just completely cracks apart. I always found that very fascinating. I thought it was an excellent point for them to bring up and a very unique thing for Terry to do because Terry's a smart ass, doesn't care.
Yeah.
He just said it. But
I love the line in there where Terry says, "This is why you can't win." He has no sense of humor.
Yep. He doesn't. I mean, we know he does, but
Mhm.
obviously the Joker does not. So I was impressed with that. I thought it was an excellent element to bring up in that story.
Anybody else?
I don't have anything about the Joker. That's an interesting thought. I'll think about it. But I always think that maybe it was Bobby talking about him being a father and recreating the family that he lost. I always think that's more important than the romantic relationships. And there were many reasons, but that was one of the things that annoyed me the most about The Dark Knight Rises was that he quit being Batman. I think it was ambiguous, because of the romantic relationship. And I always felt like I didn't think he would fully heal if he didn't have the whole family going on and if he didn't become a father.
I always in my head had an epilogue. I never thought that when he gave everything to Blake that he just stopped. I fully believe that he's like, okay, no, this is what I'm going to do. I'm leaving Gotham. But I always thought he left that as a mentorship thing. I always, in my head, again, can't, obviously the story ends right there. We don't see more, but my head canon was that he continued to mentor him because obviously leaving him all that wealth and the other things in the cave and all that, I thought he would become a full mentor, even if he wasn't physically in Gotham anymore, obviously since his death. But I mean, that was also like an alternate take on the character. And that's why, like some of it, I can separate in my head personally, just because I was like, no, this is just this person's interpretation of it. Because I mean, I don't feel that aside from like in Batman Beyond, where he was physically old and couldn't do it anymore, and he got his spirit broken like way late in the game. I think that's when he stopped.
Yeah, when I love like you said, I love the Batman Beyond reason he quit when the only way he could win was to pull a gun. He goes, I've become what I said I would never be, and I'm done.
Yeah, I remember being really choked up when they showed the scene of what made him quit. It's just so brutal. It was so brutal.
I have a question. Has everyone seen Titan season 3?
I haven't.
Not yet.
As
Okay,
in
I'm
live
not-
action, original, animated, what?
Yes.
There's lots of them.
You mean the current?
No, I mean the current.
Oh, I haven't. No.
Then I'm not going to say anything.
I have, but it sounds like we're the
No
minority.
spoilers.
Yeah, I've seen it too, but we can come back and do that after season 4 runs. Because if people haven't seen season 3 by the time season 4 runs, well, they kind of assume that risk.
And you know where I was going with that question, I'm assuming.
I'm not sure I do, but
Okay. We'll talk later.
Yeah. So Fantastic Four, Jim, we've come around to you. What makes the Fantastic Four a found family for you?
Well, and that was probably my first real found family series was Fantastic Four comic books. And I think it might have been Bobby earlier. You've already got the married couple, the brother-in-law, that relationship, and Ben as the close friend. You've got other people coming and going. But they were that unit to an extent before the accident. Whatever origin story you want to go with, the fact that they were together when that happened is what kind of takes them and pushes and stretches a lot of those family boundary limits over the time and in all the different incarnations, ignoring the bad movies. Ignoring the movies because there's no good ones, but going through a lot of the different comic series, and it's been a long time since I've read any of them. For me, it was really always you started with a family unit that then had to deal with now we're also this. And that's what pushed and changed the family dynamics and, of course, brought Ben in to be part of the family officially. but it was that kind of a change, and the fact of the ability to look at that and say, this has happened to us. How do we face this? And it was a group of people that were able, despite the familial relations, the incident, the inciting incident, regardless of which one you go with, then causes them to come together better, even though it also amps up the conflict of them as they try to figure out, who am I now individually, but they also had to figure out who they were as a family.
Bobby?
Yeah, the Fantastic Four might have been the first comic book I ever read that had a married couple in it. All the other superheroes were single, they were young, they were living this carefree life, then things go wrong and they go beat somebody up. Seeing Reed and Sue have marital squabbles and marital together, it wasn't all bad. I mean, I don't want to say just the bad stuff, but I mean, there was stuff that they did together. They had a kid, seeing them, spend time with Franklin. I thought that was just so unique because it was so different than any other comic I had read. And I love the fact too that even though they have superpowers, that book takes a different path most of the time. Like whereas Batman patrols the city, or Spider-Man patrols the city, or the Avengers get a call and they go fight whatever problem, the Fantastic Four were like, hey, I've discovered this, let's go check that out. And they go off and then they get themselves into trouble. I love the fact that it was just, you could take their powers away and it still worked. It was still that family dynamic. Ben being Reed's college buddy, someone mentioned earlier before that, the friends you make in college sometimes become your lifelong friends because you've shared that experience. And so having Reed and Ben still be together as best of friends after that, even though, technically Reed turned Ben into a monster, Reed, that could have ruined Ben's life. So the fact that they're still able to be a family, to have those squabbles and to have that togetherness, because they would all die for each other. And I think in the books, they've all died at least once. So, they would die for each other. They would probably kill for each other, and that's not even, and that's before you even get around to the kids, they would all, move heaven and earth for any of the kids that are part of the family. So, and kind of like Batman, as they've gone along, they've brought in not only other teammates, but other kids. There's a whole group called the Future Foundation now, which is all made up of kids and teenagers and whatnot from various different races around the Marvel universe that come together as kind of like a school. So Reed's kind of taken that Batman thing or that Professor X thing, and he's pulled these kids together to kind of mentor them going forward. And so it doesn't feel like your typical kind of superhero thing. So I definitely feel family probably more there than anywhere else.
Okay, Kyoko?
So I won't have much to say here because I didn't grow up reading the comics. What I will say though is, given that they've announced that Fantastic Four will introduce itself into the MCU in Phase 6, which is about 2 years off, it's going to be very important that they find actors who can make it convincingly feel like siblings. I think some of the stronger sibling relationships in the MCU have been like Thor and Loki and T'Challa and Shuri. So we got that there, but it'll be, and that's what I think is a good example. Probably Black Panther's family. So T'Challa and Shuri and their mother, and even in just the brief scene we saw with him and T'Chaka in Civil War, and then again in Black Panther, I think that they've shown it can be done really well if you write a super family, and they need to integrate that. Given that, unfortunately, the Fantastic Four had a horrible run in the movies. All of them have been bad. I mean, the one in the 70s, the one in the 2000s, and then the reboot, awful, just awful. Not one of them is just even remotely representative of what that family can be. So it's going to be very important that they cast them very well and they understand that it's going to be a challenge to make them feel like a family. But it can be done. We've seen that we can have those really great relationships and survive, the superhero shenanigans. So that's what I have to say about it.
Dahlia?
I Miss Koyiko. Your name. Can you pronounce it so I don't mispronounce it? Kyoko, I'm sorry, I didn't want to mispronounce it and offend. But I am not a Fantastic Four fan. Maybe it's because of the movies. I've seen the comics, I can read the comics, but the movies were abhorrent. I think that the casting was so wrong, so very wrong, both in all the times they've done it. But I always look at it and I think of Reed and Sue as parents, and then Johnny and Ben as, younger, going after each other, because Johnny likes to antagonize Ben. And I don't know why it's his favorite game, but he does. And then to the point that Ben is ready to rage out. And then Sue and Reed have to be the calming force in between them. So it's kind of like they give that dynamic really doesn't work for the movies, though. They all need to have their own strengths. But when you're reading it or you see the old, the old shows about it or the old movies, you get a sense of mother, father, and two boys, and then they have to have the go-between to keep them from killing each other. And it wasn't really it really doesn't appeal to me comic wise or show wise, because they seem like if they were just at odds with each other, like not like a family at odds. I'm probably rambling here, but yeah, that's what I got.
Okay, Scott?
It's really interesting because I'm the one who brought up the Fantastic Four. But I think one of the issues that that some of the comics have had, and definitely the movies, isn't trying to make them. It isn't the fact that they weren't trying to make them a family. They were trying too hard to make them a family, and they were making them into a sitcom, which didn't work because that's not what the Fantastic Four is. The Fantastic Four is an adventure book. It's got some elements of comedy. It's got a lot of different things. But for a book that was really trend setting in so many different ways to the comic book history, that was the book that introduced the squabbling, that introduced real feelings, that introduced, and so I think that, that it's obvious that Reed and Sue are the parents and Johnny and Ben are the kids. And it's there. There's no getting around it. However, I think that sometimes there's too much focus put on the family and you forget who these characters are supposed to be. We don't see enough of Reed being a scientist in the movies. When he was goofy, whatever that's supposed to mean. And a lot of the comics writers, the more modern comics writers have done that. Even in the good runs of the book, they've done it. And I think that it really takes a deep exploration to who the characters are as individuals before you can start cramming them together as family.
Okay, Kristen?
I got nothing. I don't know enough about the Fantastic Four to evaluate, but everybody said good stuff.
Jim?
Well, because I kind of started off on Fantastic Four as well, but I mean, again, just sort of looking at the family and that idea, and I think Scott's exactly right, is that a lot of the time they branded it as the first family of comics, and that idea really still resonates through. But again, and looking at how they approached the science, the adventures and things like that, because it really was a very different story in that way, because it was about the family and it was more often about what's the science, what's being done, what's being investigated. It was a little bit more of an intellectual exercise before then they went ahead and got into the mayhem. It's kind of the old saying of, I don't need to look for trouble, it's going to find me. They went looking for the trouble, and usually it was because, experiment gone awry. But to me, again, they were the first family of comics.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to jump in very quickly before we end is I felt like that. So the second time they did it with the Chris Evans one and Michael Chiklis, it felt like they were trying to emulate the first Spider-Man, like the Raimi Spider-Man, because it had all these really great beats that it would hit where it built up that relationship between Uncle Ben and Aunt May and Peter. And so by the time you knew what the inevitable was coming, you really felt awful. But I think that they kept looking at it and trying to do superficial things that they thought would hit with that Fantastic Four. Like they had all these like little comedy bits and the bickering and all that. But you're right, they just kind of throw it in there. You absolutely don't get to learn about them separately and then see them come together. It's there. and none of it was earned. And so I think it just comes across as really hollow. That's what I noticed a lot about that first one.
Now, hollow is a really good word for that, though, because it's just like even Reed, he's supposed to be the matriarch and he's supposed to be the superhero, and he just comes off as so, like Steven said, goofy. I'm like, he's supposed to be fighting Dr. Doom. Why does he seem goofy? And if you start favoring the antagonist and Dr. Doom, I kind of like him better than I like Reed.
Yeah, and having grown up reading the Fantastic Four, it's like I don't recognize it in Reed because he's not a goofy guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's a
No,
very
well,
intellectual.
arguably, he's kind of a prick.
Yeah, I mean, he's
depending on what story it is, he's kind of.
He gets very
Yeah.
because as a character, he tends to get very tunnel visioned into whatever he's doing,
And he's a scientist.
to the point that yes, he ignores the wife, he ignores the kid, he ignores, or he's short with people. Like you said, he's not overly friendly, he's not overly outgoing. For the most part, there are times. I think obviously since Franklin's been around, they've softened him a little bit. Some of my favorite little side scenes in some of the Fantastic Four comics has been where Reed will spend time with Franklin. Usually it's putting him to bed and telling him bedtime stories, but he's using his fingers, because he can change shape, and he's making the characters, with his finger, with his hand, or whatever story he's telling. And that's a side of Reed that no one outside of the readers or the family sees, because he's a very cold, calculating person. Reed is the brains of the operation. Sue is the heart of the family. Johnny is the exuberance of youth, and Ben is the soul of the family. I think Ben is the thing that kind of keeps it all together. Ben and Sue really are the thing that ties them all together and keeps them from going off the rails.
Well, this is a great discussion, and I hate to cut it off, but we're coming up on time, and we haven't even gotten to the Avengers, but we could do a whole panel about the Avengers as a found family with all those movies. So let's go around one more time and tell people where they can find information about you. If you have an upcoming or recent release that you want to mention, please feel free to do that. And Bobby, we'll start with you.
Okay. You can find me at bobbynash.com is my website. I'm all over social media. I'm author Bobby Nash on Facebook, Bobby Nash on Twitter, Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram. I have a Patreon page, websites. I'm everywhere. Just you can find me. I'm always writing. Like I said, this year I have several comics in production, so I'm very excited about that. But you can keep up with all that on my sites.
Okay, Kyoko.
So you can find everything I have at shewhowritesmonsters.com. My most recent book came out in April. It's called Applause and Inferno. That's it right there. It's our big scary Baba Yaga dragon right there. And I've got an upcoming anthology called Farther Reefs, and that'll be out in the fall. I've also just recently been featured in Terminus 2 by Milton J. Davis, and that's a science fiction fantasy anthology. I encourage everybody to go get it. It's wonderful. It's full of great stories.
And you have the coolest website name ever.
Thank you.
Dahlia?
You can find me at www.dahliaroseunscripted.com. You can find me all over social media. Just put Dahlia Rose and you'll see something. Something will come up. My current release was released on Saturday, and it's a romantic suspense set in Edinburgh, Scotland. I was over there earlier up this year, and I just had to write the story around it. So that is out now, and that's it for me.
Okay, Scott?
I am the creator of Visitations. This is a new issue that just came out. And the book can be found at visitationscomicbook.com, and I can be found under the name Scott J. Larson Art or Scott Larson Illustration on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and that's about it. I will be at Baltimore Comic-Con, where I will be telling ghost stories about true life Baltimore history.
Okay. Kristen?
I don't have anything. I don't have a website or anything. If you want to be my friend on Facebook, it's my name. My picture is a kangaroo. If you're interested in medieval queens, I can hook you up.
Well, didn't you just have a book come out about a medieval queen?
Yeah, yeah. It's about Anne of Bohemia. If you're interested in Richard II's wife, yeah, you can get it on Amazon.
Okay, Jim?
You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the speculativefictionacademy.com, and of course, your ConTinual. And I occasionally show up on social media. It looks like I'm there a whole lot more than I really am.
Well, after that list, my list is going to seem paltry, but my website is nancynorthcott.com. You can find me easily on Twitter, where I spend more time than is good for me, and I'm at Nancy Northcott. I technically have a Facebook author page, but I'm not there very much. And my most recent release was a historical fantasy mystery called The Merlin Club. And you can find me frequently here on ConTinual. So I'd like to thank everybody on the panel for joining us. Thanks again to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. And thank you for watching the panel.